Hi, everybody. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Milton Public Library is more than happy to host Natalie Jenner, author of the Jane Austen Society, to talk about her book. So before we begin, I'm just going to give a land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather at Milton Public Library is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississauga of the Credit. As we come together on these treaty lands, we thank the Mississaugas of the Credit and acknowledge that we have the responsibility to honor and respect the lands, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors who walked here before us. So I would like to give an introduction to Natalie Jenner. So Natalie Jenner is the international best-selling author of the Jane Austen Society, a fictional telling of the start of the society in the 1940s in the village of Chawton, England, where Austen once lived. Natalie was born in England and immigrated to Canada as a young child. She obtained her BA and her LLB from the University of Toronto, and in addition to a brief career as a corporate lawyer, worked as a recruiter, career coach, and consultant to leading law firms in Canada for over 20 years. Natalie was also the founder of the independent bookstore Archetype Books in Oakville, Ontario, where she lives with her family and two rescue dogs. As a USA Today, LA Times, and #1 Canadian fiction bestseller, Natalie's debut novel, The Jane Austen Society, will be published around the world in 20 different languages. So please help me welcome Natalie Jenner. It's an interview style, so we will be asking some questions, but she's happy to take some questions too from the audience. Just a little bit of a heads up, we're just running into some internet difficulties, so it may come in and out, but we're aware and we're working on it as we speak. So without further ado, hi, Natalie, welcome.
Hi, Selena, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I just want to say, I was saying earlier that I read the Jane Austen Society and I really love the book. And I just, as I was reading it, I just had all these questions regarding what to ask you. So I want to start with the first one, which is what motivated you to write this book?
Well, it was funny because I was dealing with a difficult health diagnosis at the time for my husband. And one of the things I do when I'm under stress is I reread Jane Austen, particularly Jane Austen, actually. I find she just gives me uniquely, her prose comforts me, and I know I'm going to feel an arc of justice and a certain degree of, I won't say happy ending, but the characters that you love get what they deserve. The bad guys get a version of hell, and it always just makes me feel good. And after about a year of rereading Jane Austen and then reading all these books that I have on her, a lot of which are behind me, I realized that I had done kind of a year of unintentional research. And I was also a frustrated, unpublished writer with 5 manuscripts in a drawer. And I was thinking of writing again when my husband started to stabilize a bit with his health. And I said to my family one day that I thought, if I'm going to write, I'm going to write because I'll love it. And I'll write it for my husband, which is why the dedication is to him. And I will make sure that this time it's going to be of some interest to someone outside these 4 walls. And so that was how the sort of Jane Austen light bulb kind of, turned on. And yeah, so that was sort of the inspiration behind it. It allowed me to keep thinking about her and keep rereading her and stay close to her and stay close to Chawton, a village I love very much, and that I got to spend a whole week in the year before. So.
Oh, nice. So it's funny you bring up this going through such a difficult time and then using Jane Austen to give you such comfort. One thing that was a big thing I noticed a lot in your books, and particularly I'm going to make a quote actually from page 117. So even
I love being quoted.
So even with so many flawed and even silly characters, it all makes sense in the end. It may be the most sense we'll ever get out to make out of our own messed up world. And one thing I noticed a lot about your characters is that each character in the Jane Austen Society often reflect on the moment where Jane helped them either make sense of their life and give them that sense of understanding in life. So would you say that was yours when you were going through that difficult time?
Yeah, I mean, not only did her words comfort me, but they did make me think about issues such as being true to yourself and owning what you really want, even if it's not what the Lady Catherine de Bourghs or the impoverished parents around you want. And although that wasn't my life quandary at the time, it was a sense that in the difficulty my family was going through, all I wanted to do was reread Jane Austen and be gentle to myself and focus on certain things, whether other people around me understood, my preoccupations. So her themes of authenticity and resilience and perseverance, people not overindulging their emotions, but feeling their way through difficult times, but also thinking about others and engaging with others and always striving to try and lift others up as well as yourself, and community. And these themes are also reflected in her life itself. So not only does the text of her books reinforce those themes to me, but the stories of what she went through in life, financial uncertainty, and she had, chronic ill health leading to her premature death at age 41, homelessness, dependency on male relatives for any income. And she, the way she lived through those experiences also taught me a lot.
Wow. So would you say catharsis is sort of like a big underlying theme in your book, trying to find that little joys even with all that difficulty?
Absolutely. I remember there were times when the biggest joy of my week would be, today I go get the cupcakes from the bakery downtown Oakville. And what am I going to get? And then we're going to sit in the backyard under the tree, my daughter and I, and we're going to read and we're going to have tea. And that was like the big thing for the week. But it kept me, I don't know, it kept me realizing that these small moments can be just as meaningful or beautiful as the things that we spend money on. And I remember that working through the emotional experience, then at the end of that year, I had learned so much about myself, and it has actually enabled me, I think, to cope with, we've been inside for a year because my husband has incurable lung disease and we haven't actually left our house. So the catharsis of the reading was also the developing of muscles through experiencing other people's stories of challenge and pain, as well as my own. And I think that gives you resilience.
For sure. Is that why you set the book in the 1940s? I mean, with a story like this, I could see it being in any era, but how dark you associate even 1930 to 1946, how dark those eras are. Is that why you associated it around there?
It is. It's actually half the answer. The other half was that in real life, the real Jane Austen Society first formed in May of 1940, exactly 80 years before my book came out, which was May of last year. And thank you for having me here today, because I've been yakking my face off about this now for I don't know, going on 11 months, it feels like. It's like, how can people not be so sick of me by now? But Dorothy Darnell, a local villager in Chawton, she actually gathered together a handful of people in her front parlor, just like Dr. Gray does in my book. But they were not able to raise money because the war was raging. And why I chose the end of the war was because that was in real life when the real museum cottage gets saved. But it was also a time where people were coming out of excessive trauma and loss, the kind of excessive loss that sadly I think families are experiencing today, which is the loss of maybe more than one family member or the illness of more than one family member. And that is what war does. War throws the equation of life off. Boys die before their parents. Young brides lose their husbands. And so that idea of setting at the end of the war was very much playing into that concept of, I'm going to make this. These are people that nobody cannot have sympathy for, right? These are people that everyone that reads this book is going to go, that was a lot. And that I thought would also help people maybe not relate, but have compassion and empathy for some of the mistakes that some of my characters are making, because they're flawed and they make mistakes.
Yeah, very humanistic, or very right. So just before we get on your characters a bit, I'm just curious to know, what's your favorite Jane Austen novel?
Well, my first love was Pride and Prejudice, and they say you never forget your first love. So my standard answer is Pride and Prejudice. However, a very close second, and it depends on what mood and maybe even the time of year, is Emma and Persuasion. I mean, that's half the book. So I love them all, but I just find as I get older, Persuasion and Emma actually become more meaningful to me as books, whereas Pride and Prejudice is the the wittiest and the lightest and the freshest is the one that I kind of turn to, and I want a certain kind of emotional response that's not as deep as I think Persuasion. And Emma is intellectually challenging. Every time you read Emma, you'll get something new. And so you have to be alert when you read Emma.
Yeah, Emma's definitely one of those characters that can throw you a curveball whenever she feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's for sure. So one thing I noticed, just as a bit of we talk about with Jane Austen and even with your books. So one thing I always say to people with Jane Austen as a 19th century writer, she was extremely unconventional in her writing or unorthodox. And due to the fact that her books had a very strong female lead, you didn't really see that. They talked about the female experience. But most of all that made it strange was a happy ending. A lot of books at that time, they were realistic. If you look at Charles Darwin, George Eliot, or Thomas Hardy, they talked about the hardships of life. Yeah. So, like I said, did you borrow a bit of that theme? I know we talked a bit about catharsis, but a bit of those parallels of, there's hardships, but there can be that hopeful outcome at the end?
It's interesting. The 18th century tradition of the marriage plot. Apparently, when Jane Austen was quite young and she was doing her juvenilia, learning to be a writer, apparently she was writing a lot of smaller, shorter stories, fragments, epistolary books. And it was her realization of the marriage plot as a structural device that they think gave her the sense of, oh, that's how you can wrap these suckers up. And I can go deep and I can go long and I can go wide and I can go 400 or 500 pages. And then Shakespeare, same thing, right? It was like, that was a closure that it could build too naturally and it would have structural resolution. But I also think that she was using the marriage plot, not just for the reader's catharsis, because everyone loves a happy ending. I don't trust someone who says they don't love a happy ending. Yeah. It's like, I don't trust if you don't like dogs or happy endings. But I think that for her as well, I think she really loved her characters as much as any writer has ever loved her characters. And I think she wanted her characters to get exactly that measure of what they deserved. And I think Jane Austen, I've written an essay about this that'll be coming out soon, but as a prescription, she gives you exactly the amount of heartbreak, exactly the amount of joy, exactly the amount of information, exactly the amount of catharsis, because she worked those manuscripts through for a year. These were like, she lived with them. She tried them out on her family and friends. She worked on them through all 4 seasons. And I think with the books she wrote when she was younger, I think she, worked on them for years. And I think she really reduced it. What I love about her is she's reduced it to the biggest bang for your buck, like the most. She doesn't put anything in there that she doesn't need to. So I do think there's a lot of reasons for why she's using, that happy ending. For me, I felt I was going to end the book before the epilogue. And I wrote the last scene. And I woke up the next morning, like I always do at 5, and I missed my characters. And I felt like I wanted to know they were going to be okay. And I wrote my epilogue as a way of working through my need as a writer. And then the gift to me is people often tell me they reread it sometimes. It makes them happy. And I was just like, I felt so glad I had done that for myself, but that it was something I could share with others. So I definitely gave everyone what they deserved at the end.
Yeah. You know what? I would agree with that. And it's funny you bring it up. I won't say it in case somebody here hasn't read the book, but when Jack got what he had coming, I felt good. So, and give me a thumbs up in the chat if you guys agree with me. But that was
when I wrote that line, Jack would not be ... And I remember literally like giggling. It's like, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because I don't plot or outline, so I didn't literally know what I was going to write until it was coming out of my hands on the typewriter, on the laptop. So
nice. So as you just talk about your characters and what an emotional attachment you have to them. So one thing about the story is you do have a lot of voices. You have a lot of characters, a lot of backstories that you're trying to use. And you use that to interpret it. So, but who do you relate to the most? And
that's a good question. When I wrote this book, I was coming out of this difficult period with my husband's health. And I was probably closest to Adeline when I started the book and was writing the book, in terms of how she was staying at home with her tea and her books, and she was really not engaging with people. And I remember feeling as I was writing the book that I was working through some passages, in particular about the achievement being that everyone thought you were okay and that you had convinced them all. And I remember feeling like I was doing that as well. And because my husband had been given 2 or 3 years to live, and our daughter was 14 and I was in my 40s, and he's outlived the statistics on some experimental drugs. But at the time it was like, oh, and also it's genetic. So like everyone in his family on this one side, they all have this lung disease, and there's impact for our daughter. So I was worried about multiple generations in my family and my own child and my husband. That's it. That's my family. That's who's in my house with me every day. So when Adeline goes through her experiences, I was very much feeling close to her and relating to her. But as I have myself learned the value of hope, and if anyone has got reason to celebrate this past year, it's me, with the privilege of being able to stay inside, not being an essential worker. And then having my book come out at a time where it's, you know, people email me every day telling me that, you know, that it touched them and that it's helped them, or, you know, I mean, I'm just the most privileged, lucky person right now. And so in that lens, when I think about my characters now, I relate, I think, a lot to Evie and her sort of indomitable compulsion as I continue to write. And my editor has my second book in with him right now. It's being sold. It'll come out about a year and a bit from now. But I continue to be very compulsive about my writing, and like very dedicated and ambitious. And I see Evie in myself. She's also a testament to my mother and my daughter. My mother was 14 when she had to leave school, and my daughter was 16 when I was writing this book. So all three of us, I think, you know, are captured in Evie and Adam. I think Adam is the other character that I relate to. I think Mimi is the character I would most like to be like. And she has such a joie de vivre and adventurous spirit, and another indomitable soul. But I think Adam and Evie and Adeline are the ones, you know, that I relate to emotionally.
I think Mimi was definitely that Jane Austen character that tried to, or maybe the most like Jane Austen, who tried to rise herself up in a male-dominated world, tried to build whatever she could to become the top. That's for sure. In regards to all these characters, which one do you consider to be the anchor? Like, if you don't mind me saying who I thought it was definitely Dr. Gray.
It's Dr. Gray, yeah.
Yeah, moral compass he has. It really is.
Yeah. No, he's like, I mean, there are 6 or 7 doctors thanked in the acknowledgements of my book, because that's how many human beings were having to think about my husband's health the year I was researching him, then when I was writing it, and make it a priority in their practice, because his disease IPF is actually quite rare. And I was really, I think when I was writing this book, I knew there would be a doctor. I knew there were going to be 8 to 10 characters evenly split between men and women, because men have been such a strong element of Jane Austen's fandom, and I wanted to pay homage to that. And I knew that I would give them all different jobs, because I was a career coach for over 20 years, and I know how important jobs can be, and especially the client relationship and ethical obligations, all of which works its way into my book in ways that I did not premeditate. But I knew I wanted them all to have a very different job from each other. And when I started to write Dr. Gray, I realized right away, in a town of 300 or 400, even if you're lucky enough to have a GP living in the town, which you might not always, he was going to know every single person's stories and secrets and futures. And he inevitably would end up propping an entire village of people. And there's a responsibility that comes with that. And I think that was, for me, the anchoring of the town, is because of his commitment to others' health and happiness.
Right. And especially since he was a man that just went through such great tragedy himself. He had to watch his wife sadly die and just bounce right back and help people.
And he had a history with the town. I mean, grown up there. And he had this friendship with Andrew and Frances from the time they were really young kids. And so he knew the history of the town, and he comes back there and he deals with personal tragedy, which, you know, no one wishes that on anybody else, but it does make people more compassionate and more empathetic. And I think that I loved his scenes with Adam. I remember very much loving how Adam knew he was the one person he could confide in and talk to. And I loved how Dr. Gray was so proud of Adam as the book went along and encouraging him in his own way. Because Adam is not the anchor, but he's the impetus for the finding of society. And he's the one that finally puts up his hand and says, yeah, we have to do something about this before it's too late.
Yeah, for sure. One thing too, you just brought up with your male characters. So I just couldn't help but to take note of the use of male characters, appreciating the fact that Jane Austen, traditionally speaking, has more of an appeal towards women. So by having these male characters, do you kind of hope that Jane Austen can be viewed differently as opposed to Society of Women and the idea of love? Maybe men could also see the joy in her as well.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things I learned from the research I was doing was that probably up until at least the middle of the 20th century, her male fans were as strong as her women fans. And then as the 20th century kind of came to a close in media, the prettiness of the period dramas, and I love masterpiece theater, Downton Abbey as much as anybody. The aesthetic prettiness of those as cultural interpretations of Jane Austen, and then leading into 30 years ago or so, the Colin Firth Pride and Prejudice, and how popular that was. And there was sort of a bit of a cultural appropriation of her as a romantic or chick lit writer. And that is an actual shift from what was going on a good 100 years ago. So I'd learned that through my research. So it wasn't actually projecting or transposing. It was actually wanting to bring forward the true history. I mean, there's a great book I read called Reading Austen in America by Professor Juliet Wells, and she traces the provenance of a handful of different first American editions of Emma. And there were two sisters that wrote to Jane Austen's brother in the 1860s when he was at that point in his 90s, and he was an admiral. And they wrote to him a letter in which they said, we are in love. We love your sister's writings from, 60 years ago, 50 years ago. And we were introduced to her by our father, who is the Honorable so-and-so Justice, who learned about her from the former Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court and the Assistant Justice that worked with him. So there was a real, I think, in the bench, and I think in academia, there was a lot of men studying her. And then again, I think as the 20th century wore on, that did get lost a bit. So I actually wanted to remind people of that. And I am very grateful and glad that, again, every day I have a male reader reach out to me and say, I'm really enjoying this, not to sound surprised. And so that's great. Yeah.
As you say, Colin Firth, who do you consider to be the best Mr. Darcy ever? Oh,
yeah. No, don't even ask me that, because I'm so old that it's someone from like 1980, BBC 1980 version, so, but I appreciate the virtues of the Colin Firth performance. We'll say that.
He was a good Mr. Darcy, that's for sure. So in regards to one particular character, Mimi, did you model her after Elizabeth Taylor? Because you described her violet eyes, golden hair, love of jewelry.
No, when I was picturing Mimi and her very high heels and her petite figure and her like really dark hair and the violet eyes and jewelry, that was very much inspired by Elizabeth Taylor. I had just read a somewhat trashy biography of her. I read 5 Hollywood actress biographies as part of that year of when I was reading fiction. And there's a chance of an unhappy ending. And I was reading Jane Austen because I knew I would feel good. But another thing I love to read are Hollywood or famous people's biographies, because I like learning lessons through them. And also the Me Too movement and the whole Harvey Weinstein scandal happened about 6 months before I started to write this book. So there was just a lot in the news going on about actresses' lives, and then that generation of actresses in the 30s and 40s and what they had to put up with and how they coped with it. So she's an amalgam of a handful of actresses from that time period. Elizabeth Taylor is probably one of the youngest. And then there was also Grace Kelly, Barbara Stanwyck, Ava Gardner, and Katharine Hepburn. So there's little homages to each of those actresses' real life stories in the text of my book.
Right. So Mimi being from Philadelphia is an attribute to Grace Kelly. And sorry, who were the others again?
So So Katharine Hepburn went to all-girls college called Bryn Mawr on the upper northeast coast of the United States, and that's a seven-sister college. So I had Mimi go to Smith, and then I had tribute to Ava Gardner, who did a makeup-free screen test that blew the studio's minds. They immediately put her on a train to go to Hollywood. So that part of my book was inspired by her. And then there was also Barbara Stanwyck. So
Nice. So in regards to have you traced, you said you've been to Chawton, but have you actually traced as much as you could Jane Austen's footsteps to try to gain some inspiration for the book?
Yeah, no, I mean, she didn't go far, unfortunately, in those days. Absolutely. I was very lucky. My whole life since the late 80s, I've been going to the actual museum that is her cottage that's on the front of my book. That little building there, and then Bath as well. I've been going to since the 1980s. So there's a lot of history of Jane Austen in Bath. Her parents were married there. Her father is buried there. She lived there with her parents and then with her widowed mother and sister on and off in the sort of first decade of the 1800s. That's the decade when she did not write. But until then, her life had been spent fully in Hampshire, and then they go back to Hampshire to Chawton to live in this cottage on her brother's estate, and she would go to London. So when I'm in London, I will find there's her publisher's house. That's where her brother Henry the banker lived, things like that. So I try to do it all. It's very inspiring for me as a writer to see writers' houses. I don't know what it is. That's one of the reasons I think it was so great they were able to save Jane Austen's cottage. As a writer, going to the house and seeing where their desk was, or as a reader or a fan, seeing where the desk was and whether or not they, what their pens were like and the view that they had. These are odd things to be preoccupied by. But when someone is writing, all they have is the table before them and the window next to them. And it's very evocative when you can go see that in a real museum somewhere.
Well, yeah, most writers do say they find that inspiration at home. Like just with a pen and a paper, that's all they need.
Yeah.
And when you were discovering Jane Austen, what do you think you learned about her that maybe nobody else did? Because not much is known about her, so personally wise, except for her family, her publisher, and her books. And typically, like you kind of expressed here, authors can write themselves into their character somehow. But just in this whole journey, what do you think you kind of discovered about Jane Austen that the world would be dying to know?
I mean, that's a really good question. It sounds egotistical to say that when I was writing my little book, I felt close to her as a writer. She's a genius. I've written a little book. And yet when I was writing, having this year behind me, I could feel, like I said earlier, how much she loved her characters. I felt very close to her as a writer. I also could feel her confidence. I think she knew she was a genius. I think she knew she was special. I think she was very proud of her writing. And I think we see that in the few facts we know, how much she tried her writing out on her family and friends when she was in process. She advocated for her books with her publishers, some of whom had never published a woman before. And she wrote from a very young age. She was very serious, and yet I think did not take herself too seriously, which is why you get this wonderful humor in her writing and a willingness to try things as a writer that at that time, like you said earlier, weren't necessarily the conventional path for the arc of story. But I do feel that she saw people very clearly. And when she wrote, she was very brave and she was willing to expose us to ourselves and to her own self with all our flaws that she would have had in herself as well. She sees them clearly, she conveys them clearly. And I think she had confidence and pride and a certain degree of artist ego, which I think you have to keep going the way she did. So I did feel very much that she was a real consummate professional. And we can't know for sure. We have, just like you said, a handful of facts and not many letters because her sister burned, a lot of them for reasons that we're still not sure of to this day. But we can surmise that they showed, a lot of the mundane real life families, how they talk, how sisters talk, how we talk about others. And I think that she was somebody who took her craft wonderfully seriously. And that makes me feel very close to her, but also just so proud and happy that a woman born 200 years ago would have been strong enough and brave enough to do something that has lasted this long. And she, I think she knew her books would last that long, but I think she knew that they were special.
Yeah, that's something. So do you see your book actually becoming like a miniseries? The reason why I ask is as I was reading it, and I just loved the multiple storyline, and I could just easily picture it in my head being these different scenes with these different characters with a common passion, and lo and behold, fate comes together with them. I just could see it as some sort of 4-part series that CBC does.
Yeah. No, actually, it's funny because it is in the process of being optioned for film and TV, which is exciting. And it very much the discussions so far have looked at it as possibly being a 4-part series. In fact, in my daydreaming moments, I can kind of almost figure out where I'd want each of the 4 parts to end. The book is written almost filmically as well, because I use an omniscient narrative voice, which is almost me looking through a camera when I write. So when I write, I kind of am just typing what I see in another part of my brain. And it's like I'm watching a movie unspool before me, and I'm literally just typing what's happening. It's a really fun way to write. Other people do it. It's not overly common, but at first I was wondering, like, am I nuts? I've met enough writers now. They're like, oh, that happens to me. I'm like, okay. But also, I don't know if you think about it, but I am looking down on a set because every time you meet a new character, they're usually being seen on a stone wall. Someone's looking down on them, or they're on a bench and someone's looking through a window down on them, or they're on a patio lounger and someone's looking down at them. And the next question for me as the writer always is, who's looking down on them? And then that's when the other character will come into being, and they just show up completely. Like I just right away can see everything about them and know everything about them. So I've written it in a style, narrative wise, that's filmic. I also have, the characters when they appear and when they're behaving, I do feel that it would be interesting to film. So yeah. And also, I mean, I did an event at Chawton House last week, and they have filming there. And they are very excited, the idea that we would film like literally on the real estate in the real house that I describe in my book. It exists in real life exactly like I describe it. So the idea that they might actually film one day there would be the icing on the cake of all of this. Yeah.
The biggest accomplishment out there, right? Yeah. Do you know who just could play who easily as well? Like who could play?
Yeah, Yeah. I've got it all figured out. It's like, so first of all, when I was writing the book, I heard the voice of Richard Armitage, who's an actor from a BBC show called North and South, but also was just in Netflix as a stranger. And he's been in, The Hobbit and things like that. He's a top audiobook narrator as well as an amazing actor. And he was a voice in my head when I wrote Dr. Gray, and he did the audiobook. Yep. So that's perfect. And he was actually being interviewed recently and said he'd love to play Dr. Gray one day. So he's my Dr. Gray. But I always sort of, for Jack Leonard, the Hollywood producer, I kind of saw like a Michael Fassbender, like somebody who's like really handsome, very edgy, and just like, just a glint of, I don't want to say menace, but, just like not to be trusted. And then Olivia Coleman, who just played Queen Elizabeth in The Crown, I thought could make an excellent Frances, that she could capture the nuances of Frances. And then finally for Evie, Saoirse Ronan, who is just unfortunately way too tall, because Evie's a little pixie of a girl. But I thought Saoirse Ronan would be incredible when she did Jo in Little Women especially. And I was watching that a year ago, and I remember going, oh man, she would kill as Evie. So yeah.
I would love if you could get Olivia Coleman. I adore her. I loved her as the Queen. And I think she's just hilarious if you ever hear her in interviews.
Oh, she's so great. She's got personality to spare. Yeah, she's wonderful. Yeah.
That's great. So one quote I think that definitely stood out with me for the whole book was on page 265. And the quote was, "That terrible first war and its numbing degree of loss have deprived Adam Berwick of something essential years ago, an understanding of hope. An understanding of how sometimes it is all we have, but how hope can sometimes be just enough." Is that what you want readers to take away from this book?
Yeah, I put it right there. And in fact, in my British edition, they just put it right on the back of the book. Hope can sometimes just be enough. That's it. It's as simple as that. And I think especially during these difficult pandemic times, it's that sense of sometimes it will seem like there's nothing coming that's good, or at least there's an uncertainty. And you don't feel like you can count on those good moments to come. And you have to know that they will come eventually in some form, and you have to hold out for that. And that was the lesson I learned, you know, with my husband. If I'd completely given in to the despair and not kept engaged and done the littlest I could, the littlest being reading my favorite author and then taking a trip alone to England to visit where she wrote, going to my first Jane Austen conference when I turned 50 with my daughter in Philadelphia. And all these little trips I was taking were my way of staying engaged with the world and seeing the world when I didn't maybe want to see friends and talk about my husband's health, because people wonderfully, kindly want to hear, but that's not what you want to talk about when you've been on the phone with the doctors all day. It's not a form of winding down and relaxation and regeneration. So I did these little things, and there's a way of staying engaged at a minimal level that you have to do, I think, as a human. And there's a great quote from the gentleman that wrote The Little Prince, where he said, "There are no solutions in life, only forces in motion. So create them and the solutions will follow." And I didn't know when I was rereading Jane Austen and taking those trips that I was going to have a book at the end of it. But the book wouldn't have happened if I hadn't done those small self-indulgent things that I was very lucky to be able to do with my time.
Well, I hope you get to go back to Chawton and see your.
Oh, I will. Oh, yeah. No.
Yeah. Well, we can go.
I'm never staying home again. It's like, I said I was going to rent an RV and go visit every bookshop that has been so wonderful to my book this past year, because bookstores especially, they shouldn't be essential services, but they are a major form of entertainment and information and communication, just like libraries. And, you know, I know you guys have been staying open under, you know, very difficult circumstances. And it's just critical, because the things that are getting everybody else through this difficult time are the books and the culture and the entertainment and the distraction and the learning. And it's access to resources. So I'm going to go visit everyone that ever sold a copy of my book.
That sounds like a great idea. Well, I can definitely say, everybody, it's an absolutely fantastic read. And to hear, you know, Natalie's opinions and her inspiration behind the book. And I definitely will say, what an amazing correlation between Jane Austen and this book as well, especially with Hope, because I think that was a big thing too, that Jane Austen really tried to touch on her books as well. So now we'll be taking questions from the audience. You ready for this? All right, so we'll just give them a couple minutes. So if you guys want to go into the chat section here, say something nice and ask questions, and we'll be facilitating it there.
I also, while people are thinking of questions to ask, would share that I have another book, like I said, that's coming out in a year. And it's going to be about Evie, the servant girl, 3 years after this book ends. So if you enjoy this book, there will be a continuation of her story. So I see, actually, I can see the comment. Selena, has the book been translated into other languages? Yes, it's going to be translated into 20 languages, but right now it's being translated into Brazilian, Portuguese, and Romanian, and Portuguese, and I believe the Italian and the French are coming out in the next handful of months. The other 14 languages will be kind of between now and about a year and a half from now, because you have to take time to commission a translation. And yeah, like we just sold last week to Hungary and Turkey. So those won't be happening for like a year, you know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, everybody's excited to see where Evie's going. That's for sure.
She's going into a male-dominated bookshop in London in 1950, where there's a battle of the sexes going on, raging between the male department heads and the disgruntled female staff, and she's going to get caught up in that. And it's a lot of fun.
I can see that. Evie is definitely that woman you should teach your daughters to be, who uses her head to get far. So yeah, that would be interesting. Okay, so
she doesn't take no for an answer.
She doesn't, and you know what? That makes people successful. So,
Yeah.
so A just made a comment here. Persuasion is such an overlooked gem. Do you agree?
Yes. I mean, I think Persuasion is one of her quieter books. It came at the end of her life. Has an autumnal feel to it. It's very much, I think, if you ask me again, what did you learn about her? I mean, I do have a sense that I think she was sick much longer than she let on, because I think in those days, stoicism was very much a value. And I think that she was aware that something was wrong when she was finishing that book, at least. And I think you can feel that working through of regret and the path not taken. And I think, I pay homage to that with a letter in my book, and I won't go into anything because of spoilers, but I wanted to, in the book, also have a character with Frances and capture that sense of it ain't over till it's over, and kind of give Frances the sort of final or third act that Jane Austen herself, did not get, because who knows how many masterpieces we had coming our way. And I think Persuasion was her way of kind of telling a story and working through when you make a mistake when you're young, and then having a chance to restore your dignity and your sense of self. And I think she already was there, but I think she wanted to share that with other people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right. Any more questions, guys?
No question.
Okay. I'm sure they're thinking of some, so we'll just give it a couple more minutes. I also think too, Sanditon, or sorry, don't even know if I pronounced that right, but
Yeah.
Jane Austen's incomplete work. So definitely, and the BBC tried to do a show on it, and they tried to go as far, but it just, while Jane Austen has her predictable themes, I wonder too where that even was going to go, what she was trying to bore out of that one. No doubt the catharsis and the happy ending, what do you think about that one? I always wonder.
It's very interesting. I was rereading it again last summer after watching the miniseries, and thinking about the preoccupation with health and the characters trying to actively do something. And I remember thinking she was obviously working through her own challenges physically and health-wise, but there's a whole business aspect to the beginning of that book, and I wonder how much that would have stayed in, right? That whole sense of the building of a community and creating a community from scratch, which was not what she had normally explored in her books. And I'm curious to know how much of that sense of creating a community from scratch and entrepreneurialism that required, how much those things would have stayed in by the end. I find it's an interesting book. I think she really worked through her books. I think she really reworked them. And I think that Sanditon is sort of almost evidence of that, as is the Watsons. So I'm reading some questions at the side here. Writing question for you. How did you get started with writing? Any particular books you read that helped with writing fiction? I've wanted to write from the time I was 2 or 3. I wrote my whole life. I've always written poetry and short stories. And then I went to law school, and law school is a bit of a commitment. So I spent my 20s building up a career in law. And then I spent the next few decades writing around my job. And the books that helped me, I really recommend Stephen King's book on writing, Amanda. It's great. And also for just finding overall general inspiration for writing, Anne Lamott, Lamott, has a book out called Bird by Bird. And also there's a famous book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And then finally, another book I really recommend that really helps me, because I like a good plot, is Screenplay by Sid Field. And he really breaks down the mechanics of movies as 2-hour entertainment vehicles. And when you hit your points, and when you have your first trigger incident, and when you should start wrapping things up. But his theories are very actually applicable to the pace of a book, or the 10 hours of someone's time, and how long you have to kind of hook your reader. So those are a handful of books that have really helped me. How old were you when you became interested in Austen? From Christina. Yeah, I was really young. I was 9, and my parents had this book in a box on the shelves that I was really not supposed to go near. They're like, don't go near that book. And then I remember one day opening it up and starting to read it and being able to understand her, because that first chapter in Pride and Prejudice, if that's what you get to read, it's about a family. It's about a couple who are married and they're not relating very well to each other. And that was just very relatable as a child, of sleepovers and her own parents' marriage. I was just kind of like, this seems very real to me. So I think I got interested in Jane Austen at the beginning because I could understand her, and I was a precocious reader and an ambitious reader, but also because she was really dealing with a family that seemed kind of relatable to me. And then when I was a teenager, I fell in love with the romance of her books. And now as I get older, decade after decade, I get something different from her. So that's why I turn to her in difficult times and in good. But like I said at the beginning, I find as I get older that Emma and Persuasion particularly have more to give you. It's like you catch up to Jane Austen in a way. So.
How come they didn't want you to read it?
Because it was like a nice book. It was like, get your messy peanut butter fingers all over that, just don't go near it.
Yeah. Sure. Right. Yeah. And we bring that up, Pride and Prejudice, family problems. Yeah, you can relate, can't you?
Yeah.
People write about family dynamics all the time.
Yeah. But, interestingly, not always so much, right? And historically in literature. And I think that's one of the beauties of her books, is that you can see them as on many different levels, but she really is exploring family dynamics and parental pressure, favoritism, which is something that people don't, we don't want to admit we do it in real life. We don't see it in books very often. Well, we do, but she really puts it out there that Mr. Bennet does not like those other girls except for her and Jane, for Lizzie and Jane, right? Like, I remember thinking, that's interesting. They just all know that. Like, that felt kind of refreshing almost to me, very real.
Yeah. Definitely the line for me with Pride and Prejudice. I think that stole my heart. Elizabeth Bennet, you have bewitched me body and soul.
I think that's from the movie. I really do. I do not think
it's in there. It's been a while, but
I think all I've done it. I did it with something else. I said in a speech recently that this is from the book, and then later I found out, no, you've crossed wires. That is from the Colin Firth Pride and Prejudice.
Okay.
So that happens. Oh, and then somebody else asks, how often do I reread Jane Austen's books? So I'm always sort of reading her. I think I took a bit of a break last year because I was moving into my new book was set in 1950s, and it was dealing with some real life writers. I was doing a lot of research about that. So I was reading more currently, I would say, as a newly published author as well. A lot of people are giving me great early copies of books before they get published. So I've been reading a lot of that. But that said, I read Northanger Abbey and Sanditon in like the past 6 months. So I would say I read a different Jane Austen, like at least one every year, and sometimes two. Yeah.
Then we have Evie working in a department store. I see Selfridges.
Yeah, no, she's in a bookstore. She's in a bookstore all alone on the rare books floor. That's my girl. So.
That's your girl. Yeah. All right. Do we have any more questions? Just give it another minute and then we'll see what comes up.
Yeah. This is great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm very, very thrilled that the Milton Public Library is showcasing my book like this, and love having this chat bar here too. That's really great.
Thank you for joining us. This has been a great talk. I think everyone here can agree. It's been so much fun to learn the book a little bit deeper from the woman who created the world. Love it. All right. I think that's all we've got for you tonight. So thank you so much, Natalie Jenner, for joining us. It was truly a pleasure. To everyone here, her book, The Jane Austen Society, soon to become a 4-part mini-series, is available at Milton Public Library, and we will definitely be keeping an eye out for your next book. Everybody is so excited for that. And one more question. Any chance of you reviving Archetype books?
Oh, we talk about it all the time. I mean, I think, it will never make any money. You don't necessarily have to lose money with the bookshop. They are not profit centers. But I'm very fortunate to have this thing that I'm able to do, even in a pandemic, safely, which is write. And I hope to keep writing. And I would love to one day open a bookshop and have not staff it like solely myself, like I did with Archetype, but have a manager. I would love to do something like that. I'll be the Anne Patchett of Oakville, Ontario. I'm joking, but goals. So.
Seriously though. All righty. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that if that ever does happen. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Natalie. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending and for asking questions. And everybody stay safe and well.
Stay safe. Have a good night, guys.
Okay. Take care. Good night.
Take care.